It's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's a ninja, dummy. It's Ganbare Goemon for the Famicom. The full name of this title is Ganbare Goemon Karakuri Dōchū. In English, that title could roughly translate to either Persevere Goemon, Tricky Travels, or You Can Do It Goemon, The Tricky Journey. But for the remainder of this video, I'm just going to refer to it as Goemon. It is the second Goemon game. The first Goemon game was arcades only, but this came out for the MSX and for the Nintendo Famicom, and it was never released in the United States. The game came out on July 30th, 1986, and it's a bit of a hybrid between an action-adventure style game and an arcade game, but it also has kind of almost RPG-like elements as well as dungeon crawling, like a pseudo 3D dungeon crawling. One thing that this game does really well though is all of the enemies and characters and Goemon himself, they are all outlined in black and it helps them pop from the background. And so it looks like a really advanced title graphically because of those borders and because they've got these chunky characters and chunky sprites. And the interesting thing about Goemon, if you're wondering who Goemon is Goemon is an actual historical figure. He's somewhat comparable to a Robin Hood type of character in that he was known for stealing from the wealthy and sharing with the poor. A little more officially, here is Goemon's background. Goemon's full name is Ishikawa Goemon. Goemon was born in 1558 as Sanada Kuranoshin. He began training in ninjutsu at a young age in order to avenge the death of his father, who was a samurai. He studied under Master Momochi Sandaiyu, but he was forced to leave when he was caught sleeping with one of Sandaiyu's mistresses. And that's when he changed his name to Goemon. He moved to where modern-day Osaka would be in the Kansai region of Japan, and that's where he led a bandit camp that would steal from rich people and share their spoils with the less fortunate. He was executed in 1594 after an attempted assassination on October 8th, and supposedly he was to be boiled alive with his son, but he held his son in the air until he passed, so his son was spared. That's a brief rundown of who Goemon was. But for a much more detailed look, I highly recommend you check out GTV Japan's video on Goemon and the history of Goemon and the games, because it's a fantastic video. But anyway, back to the game. The general goal of Goemon is to make it through all 13 stages. And then actually, those 13 stages repeat 8 times. It can be quite a lengthy affair if you want to 100% the game. But of all of the 13 stages, they follow a general format of collecting 3 passes, which are little white sprites that have some kanji written on them. And once you have 3 and you make it to the end of the stage, you're allowed to progress to the next stage. And that's the general flow. You find the passes and then you move on. There's also usually 1 dungeon that's required per stage. And by dungeon, I mean down into this sort of 3D, like step, turn, step, turn, sort of like maze dungeon. I know that there are other games that do this, but this is the first game I've played with that sort of like really rigid, just forward. It's kind of like, I guess Etrian Odyssey reminds me of it a little bit, but this is a much more archaic version of that, and you're not drawing your own. But anyway, there's an overworld portion, and that's where you start the game, and it's where you wander around, and in the overworld portion, you're constantly searching for these hidden staircases, and the only way to reveal where those are is by jumping in random areas of the map. And that part is a little annoying. So as you're going across, it kind of makes sense to just keep jumping everywhere you're going because you're really just looking for these passes. Your high score is, you know, if you care about a high score, you can collect everything as you go, but really all you need are the passes to progress. But it is worth picking up money because you can kind of level Goemon up by purchasing different things in the shops. But I'll get into that a little bit more later. The game as a whole is really split between overworld sections and then the underworld sections that you discover. Then the collection of shops, houses, and inns or hotels that you can stay at. And then finally, in one of those buildings, there will always be an entrance to a dungeon where you'll have to like go in there and do that whole thing. The other thing is that as you're jumping and you're finding these hidden staircases, there's always two, or not always, there's usually two. So you'll go down into the underworld, you'll jump around, and then there's usually another exit. And the first time I played this game, I almost always just went through. But the best thing to really do is to explore it fully, remember what it looks like, and head back out the way you came. Because these stages, they're not too complex. They're just like usually laid out areas, and there are sometimes branching paths where you'll go to another long strip of an area. But because everything looks so samey, it can be hard to remember where exactly you are. And so it's easy to get lost in this game. So if you're playing this, you really want to go deep down and then right back out where you came. You don't want to just go all over the place unless you're really low on time and you just don't know where you're going. But the gameplay, it's kind of a mishmash of a bunch of different sort of things. It's like a kitchen sink cookie of gameplay ideas, and it's all kind of like stirred together. And some things work a lot better than others. Like there are platforming segments that are probably the least enjoyable part of this game. It also, in general, functions somewhat like a beat-em-up game, but it's not really. And then it has these sort of RPG mechanics where as you're picking up these items, you can increase your speed, you can get a weapon that allows you to slingshot gold bullion. You can get an umbrella to protect from aerial attacks, armor to protect from regular projectiles. There's just a lot going on, and it kind of does work, but it does feel almost like you're playing a demo of all the different things Konami's capable of. And I think that maybe in their later games, which I haven't played yet, I'm assuming, given the legendary status of this company, that they likely shrunk things down and focused on one specific thing. And then over here, we're doing that thing. But Goemon is just kind of like having fun. I do appreciate that, but when you're hopping in, I don't know, it just feels kind of like it doesn't all come together. Like it's not tightly knit. It's not convincing that all of these different things need to be in this game. Another thing that's a little interesting about the gameplay in Goemon is that to find money and to find a lot of these upgrades, you have to jump over blocks on the ground. And sometimes you'll jump over a block and it'll give you a coin and it's still showing as active. So you can keep jumping and it'll keep giving you coins until it caps out. And this is funny because it's like an inverted Mario Brothers. Instead of jumping up into the blocks, you're just jumping over the packages and parcels on the ground. I think that they were trying to find a way to like make a jumping game, and they're like, well, we want blocks. You gotta have blocks with jumping. And well, we can't have them jump into the blocks because Mario already did that. So how about we just jump over them? So I thought that was amusing. But as a whole, understanding how to beat this game comes down to your knowledge of how to acquire the passes and avoiding death at all costs. Because those things that you can get to improve Goemon's status, your amount of health, your ability to take hits without taking real damage, your ability to lose all of your life and then gain your life back, those things all go away if you die one time. And you have to get them all over again. And so that's really what it boils down to. And I guess I'll delve into the items real quick because there are a lot of items and I'll try and get through them very quickly, explaining what they do and why they matter. As I've stated many times already, the pass is the item that you're going to need that's required to get through the gates at the end of every stage to go to the next stage. The slingshot is what you use to get your ranged attack, which is when you're firing gold at enemies. And that's acquired by picking up something called a Maneki Neko, or beckoning cat. To increase Goemon's speed, you want to pick up the sandals, and that's done by picking up a taco mask or octopus mask. Those can be purchased, but I wouldn't waste my money on them because it's very easy to find them by jumping over the different parcels on the ground. You can have up to 3 sandals, and you want that in generally all places, except it really kind of hurts you in the platforming segments of this game because the platforming is just so difficult and just so unfair. The hammer is another item. It's a rare item which you can find jumping over certain locations, but the hammer is this game's version of the star from Mario. And as you know, every single game needs a Mario star, apparently. There are also Dango in this game. If you collect Dango, all of your missing health will be restored. Ramen is essentially just a health pickup, and you can find these in shops all over the place. Onigiri, or donuts, is one of the most important items in this game because it's like your buffer in case you die. Once your health reaches 0, if you have onigiri, they'll go all the way back up and you're safe. If you're running low on time, you can purchase an hourglass. A straw hat is something that you can get to protect yourself from light objects that'll come down from the sky. And there are bird enemies in this game that like to fly over you, and some of them drop eggs, so it's good to pick that up. It's good to get any item that you don't have, because once you have all of the items in Goemon, you're essentially max level. And I'm just now realizing that this is kind of similar to Cave Story, where in Cave Story, you're not really leveling up, but you level up your guns. And then if you get hit too many times, you got to re-level them up. This is kind of like that in Goemon, where you lose all of your upgrades, but it's not that hard to get them all back. Armor is something that you can get that lets Goemon withstand up to 5 projectile attacks that are thrown at him horizontally. These are things like lamps thrown by security forces or bubbles that are blown at him by crab. You can also get a helmet, which is really sick looking. I wish that when you bought these things, it actually outfitted Goemon with them. That would be pretty next level, but it's understandable given the limitations of the hardware. The helmet protects Goemon from harder objects that fall from the sky. So there are things like boulders and rolling rice barrels that can appear on the streets, and the helmet allows you to withstand some of that, separate from like the light attacks like the eggs. The Omamori, or the talisman, allows you to avoid being dragged back to the beginning of a stage by the taxi enemy. And so this next item is one that I wish I had known about. I mean, I purchased it, I just wasn't always sure what it was doing. This is the pillbox, or the in-ro. So there are 5 herbs that are stored inside this item that will restore a single unit of damage if Goemon is touched by someone, and this happens automatically. So I noticed that was happening because I was confused as to why I wasn't taking damage sometimes. But the most important thing that this thing does that I was not aware of is if you're inside of a dungeon, if you press the A and B button inside of a dungeon, which I was never pressing because I felt like I had no reason to, it'll show you the map of the dungeon layout. One of my least favorite parts of this game is getting lost in those. Inside the dungeons, you can also find bonus lives, and it's just a red sheet of paper that has some kanji written on it, and it has a distinct look. The other thing you can buy, which I don't really think is worth it, is the candle. The candle seems like it's a really good thing at a surface level because it shows you where the hidden staircases are. But I'm going to give you a tip. They tend to be on the edges of each of the long rectangular bands that make up the overworld. So always check the edges first. You can also find scrolls, and those increase the number of hits that you can take. Those are usually found in the underworld. And then lastly, the little boxes that you'll find often in the underworld or in dungeons are coffers. And coffers are just boxes that contain a bunch of gold inside. And that's all the items. Congratulations. Now you know what they do, because if you're gonna play this game, it doesn't tell you, and you probably can't read what they are. And even if you could read what they are, it's just not super clear, like, oh, if I buy onigiri, it means that when my, like. One cool thing, the enemies, they don't they don't do a whole lot that's different. they don't all, I mean, they just try and bump into you. Some of them will throw slow projectiles at you. Some of them will drop them from above, but they look so cool. But you've got security guards, Ronin and samurai, merchants, fishermen, thieves, Bushin and mercenaries, taxi runners, villagers, mountaineers, ninjas, farmers, soldiers, riflemen, bodyguards, palace guards, ducks, crows, crabs, boars, chickens, Oni, and Tengu. And then the physical objects that you have to dodge are the rice barrels that'll be bouncing down the streets, and then the rocks that'll be falling down from the cliffs. And in all of the chaos, there are two characters that look like they could be enemies, but they're not. That would be Omitsu-chan and Princess Yuki. If you hit them, you lose something. I'm not sure, maybe it's health. But when you pick them up, it's 1,000 bonus points. You're picking up ladies, you're throwing money all over the place. You're just, you know, wreaking havoc? What's the word I'm looking for? Raising hell. I don't know. You're having a good time. You're Robin Hood of Japan. You're Goemon. Ganbare Goemon. You can do it, Goemon. The tricky journey. So I will also talk about the stages a little bit before reaching my final thoughts. Stage 1 is pretty basic, and the dungeon is actually kind of cool in that one because it's so simple. And so this is like fine without a map. Section 2 has a really cool aesthetic. I like the woodland area and the town vibes, and the enemies look cool too. It's almost easier than Section 1, I want to say, but the dungeon area is a little bit more difficult. Section 3 is kind of one of the first of a few sections like this where there's like some platforming, and it's kind of like takes place up in the mountains. Really cool look, except some of the backgrounds don't quite like makes sense totally the way that they look to me. The dungeon here is actually not so bad. There's lots of turns and stuff, but it's pretty straightforward. And then this is your first battle with a Tengu, so that's something too. Section 4 is your first real introduction to the garbage platforming in this game, and it's where you'll learn that, like, you know, you don't take damage if you fall, you lose a whole life. And this is really where you're gonna lose your lives in Goemon. Like, you can be careful, but once you fall in the water or fall in a cliff area, you're gonna lose every upgrade that you've gotten up to this point. Your health's gonna go back to the base health. You're gonna be really slow. And yeah, it's just, it never feels fair when you die to these parts because it feels like just something that they put in there because they could. I don't know. But Section 4's dungeon is kind of annoying, but it's not too much to get through. But Section 5 is your first big stage. I think there's 7 different sections in Section 5. It's massive. But it's not too difficult. It's kind of just like an expanded version of the first one. But you go back to the ocean for Section 6, and it's a bunch of garbage because it's just more platforming. But then Section 7 is more like taking you back to the woods, but they changed the color palette a little, and it's kind of like the bigger version of the second stage. Section 8 was my least favorite stage in the whole game, and that's because it had the most garbage platforming, and you have to focus on making the jumps despite all of the enemies, and you have to just accept that you're going to be taking a ton of damage. And if you fall off one time, you know, if you just don't make a jump, then you lose all of that, all the layers of protection that would get you to the end of the stage. So you might actually die on this stage to health because it's just that much more difficult. Conversely though, Section 9 is one of my favorite stages in the game. It's very cool like river or like lake, sort of like, or maybe it's ocean. I'm not 100% sure, but it's a really cool waterside village that you're making your way through. It's really unique. And so Section 9, it kind of like brings it back a little bit. Section 10 is massive, and it also has a kind of cool segment where you're gonna have to like tiptoe on a ledge. It makes you feel a little bit like a ninja because you're nifty. So Section 10's fun. It's like a city style area. It feels more like a like you're inside of a fortress or something. It may actually technically be a fortress. I'm not 100% on that one. For Section 11, it's kind of back to the first style of section. And then for section 12, we get something a little different. Section 12 is just make it to the end. They throw a ton of enemies at you and they're just trying to see like, this is like the pre-game for the final big boy stage coming in stage 13. And it's a lot of fun, but it is a little annoying because when you get there, you're probably not gonna have all of your upgrades unless you played it really safe. So what happened to me is you can actually fall in the water on this stage, and that's not super obvious. So you'll like make a jump up or you'll make a jump down and you're off the stage, and then congratulations, you're starting from scratch. And then finally, section 13. Section 13 is the final stage in the game, and I made it there and I was working my way through, and it looks gorgeous. And it's challenging, but in a good way, because it's dodging enemies and finding a way to make it through. The only issue is, if you die in this game, there is a continue, but to continue, you have to hold A, B, and press start. And there was a point at which I died in this stage, and I kind of just put my head down for a second because it was like catching my breath, but I missed the window. And so it just went back to the title screen and I didn't get to keep playing. And at that point, I was upset because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to spend hours getting all the way back there. There's no saving in this game. And then I realized, actually, no, I don't. And so I didn't. It just didn't feel worth it to go back and play this game again because it's just not that much fun. And it's weird to say that because a lot of parts of this game are put together very well. It looks great. The enemies look great. There's lots of variety. There's lots of places to go. And yet it just lacks that special sort of character. I don't know. I don't think that Goemon finds its identity in this game. I know for a fact that Goemon gets crazy in later games with some of the enemies, with just wackiness, goofiness, and this feels more like a translation of the arcade game, kind of. I liked that there were hidden names in some of the underground segments. I also thought that the music was pretty good in this game. I didn't feel the need to turn the music off, and so that's a pretty good sign. I think the art style and the execution of the main sort of beat 'em up portion and the jumping over the blocks, that's really done well. And the enemy variety and just the sprite variety and location variety in general, super solid. But I didn't really like how the different styles of gameplay didn't really mesh super well. It kind of took away from the package as a whole, having too many different things in there, because a lot of them weren't fleshed out enough, and a lot of them didn't really provide any justification for why they were there in the first place. And the platforming was just butt. It was awkward. And also, it was just kind of boring after a while. It's a fun game to pop in and play because it controls well. But after a certain point, it's just a bigger version of the same thing. And it's not super worth playing. But I will say, the final sequence that happens that I didn't get to see because I didn't hit continue fast enough in the final stage, I'll go ahead and roll that footage for you because it's incredible. I think that I would recommend trying this game out, and I would also recommend stopping when you feel like stopping. I don't think that it's one of those games that deserves to be beat, especially not when you consider that the real ending is locked behind doing all 13 stages 8 times. But it's a cool game, I'll give it that. And what it's really doing is just opening the door to a very long-running and storied franchise in video gaming. I'm really looking forward to playing Goemon 2, and I think there are 4 total Goemon titles on the Famicom, so stay tuned for that. But anyway, thanks for watching. Peace.